The rain drummed against the windows of Emily's small apartment in Portland, Oregon, creating a rhythmic melody that usually brought her comfort. But tonight, as she sat curled up on her second-hand couch with a cup of chamomile tea, the sound felt ominous. The November evening had settled in early, casting long shadows across her modest living room, filled with plants she'd rescued from various clearance sales. Emily Chen had always been content with her simple life. At 32, she worked as a librarian at the downtown branch, lived alone except for her tabby cat Mochi, and had grown accustomed to the quiet solitude that had defined most of her existence. Her father, Richard Chen, had left when she was 7, and her mother had raised her with a mixture of bitterness and resignation that colored every conversation about family. The shrill ring of her phone cut through the evening calm. Emily glanced at the unknown number, hesitating. She rarely received calls, especially not at 8:30 on a Tuesday night. "Hello?" she answered cautiously. "Is this Emily Chen, daughter of Richard Chen?" The voice was professional, formal. Emily's stomach tightened. "Yes, that's me. Who is this?" "This is Jonathan Whitmore from Whitmore, Sullivan and Associates. I'm calling regarding your father, Ms. Chen. I'm afraid I have some difficult news." Emily set down her teacup with trembling hands. 25 years of silence from her father, and now this. "What about him?" "Ms. Chen, I'm very sorry to inform you that your father passed away 3 days ago. Heart attack. He was found in his home office in Manhattan." The words hit Emily like a physical blow. She had spent years convincing herself that Richard Chen was essentially dead to her anyway, but hearing the actual words created an unexpected hollow ache in her chest. I see," she managed. "Ms. Chen, there's another matter we need to discuss. Your father left explicit instructions that you be contacted immediately upon his death. You're named as the primary beneficiary in his will." Emily blinked, certain she'd misheard. "I'm sorry. What?" "You'll need to come to New York for the reading of the will. Can you be here by Friday? I know this is short notice, but there are time-sensitive matters that require your attention." Emily's mind reeled. Beneficiary? Her father, who hadn't sent so much as a birthday card in 25 years, had left her something? "Mr. Whitmore, I think there might be some mistake. My father and we haven't spoken since I was a child. I understand this must be shocking." "Ms. Chen, but I assure you there's no mistake. Your father was very specific about his wishes. Would it be possible for you to travel here by Friday morning?" Emily stared out at the rain, her reflection ghost-like in the window. Yes, I suppose I could request time off work. Excellent. I'll email you the details. And Ms. Chen, I think you should prepare yourself. This is going to change your life significantly." After hanging up, Emily sat in stunned silence. Mochi jumped onto her lap, purring and kneading her legs, sensing her distress. She stroked his fur mechanically, trying to process what had just happened. Her father was dead. Her estranged, mysterious father, who had built a life she knew nothing about, was gone, and somehow, impossibly, he had remembered her. The next morning, Emily called in to work and explained the situation to Mrs. Patterson, the head librarian, who was surprisingly sympathetic and immediately approved her time off. As Emily packed her single suitcase, she owned so little that everything fit easily. She tried to imagine what her father might have left her. Perhaps a small savings account, or maybe some family photos she'd never seen. The flight to New York felt surreal. Emily had never been on a plane before, had never left the Pacific Northwest. As the aircraft descended into JFK Airport, she pressed her face to the window and watched the sprawling metropolis unfold below her. Manhattan's skyline jutted into the gray November sky like something from a movie, overwhelming and intimidating. The taxi ride into the city was a sensory overload. The honking horns, the constant motion of people and vehicles, the towering buildings that blocked out most of the sky. It was everything Portland wasn't. Emily clutched her purse tightly and gave the driver the address of the modest hotel she'd booked near the lawyer's office. That evening, alone in her hotel room with its view of a brick wall, Emily finally allowed herself to cry. Not just for her father's death, but for all the years of wondering, of creating stories in her head about why he'd left, of hoping he might return. She cried for the little girl who had waited by the window every Father's Day, and for the woman who had stopped waiting but never stopped wondering. Thursday morning arrived gray and cold. Emily walked the streets of Manhattan, marveling at the energy and pace of the city. Everyone seemed to have somewhere important to be, striding purposefully with their coffee cups and phones. She found herself wondering if her father had walked these same streets, if he'd been one of these confident, busy people. She spent the day visiting the Metropolitan Museum of Art, trying to distract herself from her anxiety about the next day's meeting. As she wandered through the halls filled with centuries of human creativity and expression, she felt simultaneously insignificant and connected to something larger than herself. Friday morning came too quickly. Emily dressed in her only professional outfit, a navy blue dress she'd bought for job interviews years ago, and made her way to the offices of Whitmore, Sullivan & Associates. The building was intimidating, all glass and steel reaching toward the sky, with a marble lobby that echoed her footsteps. Jonathan Whitmore turned out to be a distinguished man in his 60s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. His office was lined with law books and featured a view of Central Park that probably cost more than Emily made in a year. "Ms. Chen, thank you for coming so quickly," he said, gesturing for her to sit in one of the leather chairs facing his desk. "Before we begin with the formal reading, I want to give you some context about your father's situation." Emily nodded, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "Your father was a very successful man, Ms. Chen. He built a technology consulting company from nothing and sold it 15 years ago for a considerable sum. He invested wisely and lived well, but not extravagantly. He never remarried, had no other children." "But why?" Emily's voice cracked slightly. "Why didn't he ever contact me?" Mr. Whitmore's expression softened. "He spoke of you often, especially in recent years. He said he'd made the biggest mistake of his life when he left, but he convinced himself that you were better off without him. He was afraid that reaching out would cause you more pain." Emily felt tears threatening again. "He was wrong. Yes, I believe he knew that toward the end. Which brings us to why we're here." Mr. Whitmore opened a folder on his desk. "Ms. Chen, your father's estate is valued at approximately $14.7 million. The words seemed to hang in the air between them. Emily was certain she'd misheard. "I'm sorry. How much?" $14.7 million. The penthouse apartment on the Upper East Side, the house in the Hamptons, his investment portfolio, his art collection, his cars. All of it goes to you. You are his sole beneficiary." Emily's vision seemed to blur around the edges. That's impossible. There must be other family, other people who... There are distant relatives, yes. Cousins, aunts, uncles. But your father was very clear. Everything goes to you, with one exception. He left $50,000 to his housekeeper, Maria Santos, who had worked for him for over a decade. The room seemed to tilt. Emily gripped the arms of her chair, trying to ground herself. "I don't understand. I can't. This doesn't make sense." Mr. Whitmore reached into his desk drawer and pulled out an envelope. "He left this for you. Perhaps it will help explain." With shaking hands, Emily took the envelope. Her name was written on it in handwriting she didn't recognize, but somehow knew was her father's. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "My dear Emily, if you're reading this, then I'm gone and you're probably confused and maybe angry. You have every right to be. I made the worst decision of my life when I walked away from you and your mother. I told myself I was giving you a better chance. that you'd be happier without a father who didn't know how to be a father. I was a coward. I was 26 years old, scared out of my mind, and I ran. I spent every day since then regretting that choice, but I was too ashamed to face what I'd done. I convinced myself that too much time had passed, that reaching out would only hurt you more. I know this money can't make up for the years we lost, but I want you to have the life you deserve. I want you to have choices I never gave you. I want you to know that leaving you was not about you. It was about my own failures and fears. I loved you every day, even from a distance. I hope someday you can forgive me. Your father, Richard. Emily read the letter 3 times before she could speak. When she finally looked up, Mr. Whitmore was watching her with gentle concern. Ms. Chen, I know this is overwhelming. You don't have to make any decisions today, but there are some immediate practical matters we need to address. Emily nodded mutely, still clutching the letter. First, the media attention. Your father's death and the size of his estate will likely attract some publicity. I'd recommend being cautious about who you trust and what information you share. Media attention? Emily's voice was barely a whisper. Unfortunately, yes. Wealthy individuals' estates often become public interest, especially when there's an unexpected heir. Which brings me to my second point. You're likely to hear from people you haven't spoken to in years. Family members, old friends, acquaintances. Not all of them will have your best interests at heart. Emily thought of her small circle in Portland. Her co-workers at the library, her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Kim, the owner of the coffee shop where she went every Sunday morning. Her quiet, predictable life suddenly felt very far away. What do I do? She asked. Be careful. Be very careful about who you trust. And remember, you're under no obligation to share your inheritance with anyone, regardless of what they might say or how they might pressure you. The rest of the meeting passed in a blur of legal documents, signatures, and explanations of trusts and accounts that Emily barely comprehended. When she finally left the office 3 hours later, she was legally $14 million richer and felt completely untethered from reality. Walking through Central Park in the afternoon light, Emily found a bench and sat down, watching joggers and dog walkers pass by. She pulled out her phone and stared at it, realizing she had no one to call. No close friends, no romantic partner, no family members she was close to. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was now one of the wealthiest people she'd ever known, and also one of the loneliest. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Emily, I just heard about Uncle Richard. I'm so sorry for your loss. It's your cousin Sarah, Margaret's daughter. I'd love to see you while you're in town. Can we meet for coffee tomorrow? Emily stared at the message. She had vague memories of cousin Sarah from early childhood. Maybe at a family gathering she could barely recall. How had Sarah gotten her number? How did she even know Emily was in New York? As she sat there trying to remember the last time anyone had expressed interest in spending time with her, another text arrived, this one from someone claiming to be her father's old college roommate, expressing condolences and asking if she needed any help during this difficult transition. Then another, from a high school acquaintance she hadn't thought about in 15 years. And another. Emily's hands began to shake as she realized what Mr. Whitmore had tried to warn her about. Word was already spreading. People were already reaching out. For the first time in her adult life, people wanted to know her, wanted to spend time with her, wanted to help her. As she walked back to her hotel through the bustling streets of Manhattan, Emily tried to push down the small, hopeful voice in her head that whispered, "Maybe you won't be alone anymore." She had no way of knowing that this hope would become her greatest vulnerability, and that the people reaching out to her were about to teach her the most painful lesson of her life. That love given freely is precious precisely because it's so rare. Emily returned to Portland the following Monday, but her small apartment felt like it belonged to someone else. Everything looked the same. Her collection of rescued plants, Mochi's favorite sunny spot by the window, the stack of library books on her coffee table. But she felt like an imposter in her own life. The weight of her father's letter in her purse and the legal documents in her suitcase made her modest surroundings seem almost fictional. She had taken another week off from work, telling Mrs. Patterson she needed more time to handle family affairs. The truth was, she needed time to think, to figure out what to do with a life that had been completely upended in the span of a single phone call. On Tuesday morning, as she sat in her kitchen drinking coffee and trying to make sense of her new reality, her phone rang. The number was local, but she didn't recognize it. Emily. Oh my goodness, is this really you? The voice was warm, feminine, slightly breathless with excitement. Yes, this is Emily. Who is this? It's Jessica. Jessica. Moreau? Well, it's Jessica Chen now. I was Jessica Rodriguez in high school. We were in Mrs. Martinez's English class together. I heard about your father, and I just had to reach out. Emily searched her memory. Jessica Rodriguez? Yes, she remembered her vaguely. Popular, confident, part of the group that Emily had always observed from the periphery, but never been part of. Oh, hi, Jessica. I remember you. I'm so sorry for your loss, Emily. I know you and your dad weren't close, but still, it must be so hard. Listen, I hope this isn't weird, but I was wondering if you'd like to get together, maybe have lunch. I always regretted that we lost touch after graduation. Emily felt a flutter of something she hadn't experienced in years. The possibility of friendship. That would be nice, actually. Great. How about tomorrow? There's this wonderful little bistro downtown that just opened. My treat, of course. You shouldn't have to worry about anything right now. They arranged to meet at noon, and after hanging up, Emily found herself smiling for the first time since Mr. Whitmore's call. Maybe something good could come from this terrible situation. Maybe she could finally have the connections she'd always longed for. Wednesday arrived gray and drizzly, typical Portland weather that Emily usually found comforting. She dressed carefully, choosing a nice sweater and jeans, and arrived at the bistro a few minutes early. Jessica was already there, and Emily was struck by how polished she looked. Perfectly styled blonde hair, expensive-looking clothes, manicured nails that caught the light as she waved Emily over. Emily, you look wonderful, Jessica gushed, standing, up to give her a hug that felt surprisingly natural. I'm so glad you could make it. The lunch was actually pleasant. Jessica was charming and attentive, asking about Emily's work at the library, her life in Portland, her memories of high school. She shared stories about her own life, her marriage to a successful contractor, her 2 young children, her part-time work as a real estate agent. You know, Jessica said as they shared a dessert, I always admired you in high school. You were so independent, so focused on your studies. I was always running around trying to fit in with different groups, but you knew who you were. Emily felt a warmth spread through her chest. Really? I always thought I was just invisible. Are you kidding? You were mysterious, intriguing. I always wanted to get to know you better, but you seemed so self-contained. Jessica reached across the table and squeezed Emily's hand. I'm so glad we're reconnecting now, even though it's under sad circumstances. As they parted ways, Jessica hugged her again. Let's not let another 15 years pass, okay? I'd love to introduce you to my family. Maybe you could come to dinner this weekend? Emily walked back to her apartment with a lightness in her step that she hadn't felt in years. For the first time, she began to think that maybe her father's death, as tragic as it was, might lead to something positive, real connections with people who actually cared about her. That evening, her phone buzzed with a Facebook friend request from Jessica, followed immediately by a message. Had such a wonderful time today. Already looking forward to seeing you again soon. Over the next few days, the messages and calls continued. Sarah, the cousin from New York, called to check on her and mentioned that she was planning a trip to Portland for work. Wouldn't it be wonderful if they could spend some time together? An old college acquaintance named David reached out through LinkedIn, saying he'd heard about her loss and wanted to offer his support as someone who'd also lost a parent young. Emily found herself with a social calendar for the first time in her adult life. Coffee dates, lunch meetings, dinner invitations. People who had been absent from her life for years or decades suddenly seemed genuinely interested in her well-being, her thoughts, her experiences. Jessica invited her to a dinner party at her house, introducing Emily to her husband Mike and their friends as my wonderful friend from high school. Emily found herself in animated conversations about books, travel, current events, topics she'd only ever discussed with library patrons, or in her own head. The warmth of being included, of having people laugh at her observations and seek out her opinions, was intoxicating. You should come to our book club, offered one of Jessica's friends, a stylish woman named Patricia. We meet twice a month, and we'd love to have someone with your literary background. And you absolutely must join our hiking group, added another. We do day trips around the Columbia River Gorge. It would be perfect for you. Emily felt like she was glowing from the inside out. After years of solitude, she was suddenly part of multiple social circles, with invitations coming faster than she could accept them. Sarah arrived from New York the following week, and Emily was struck by how much she resembled their grandmother, or at least Emily's faint memories of her grandmother from early childhood. Sarah was warm and vivacious, with an infectious laugh, and an easy way of making Emily feel like they were old friends, rather than cousins who barely knew each other. I can't believe we lost so many years, Sarah said over dinner at one of Portland's upscale restaurants. Family is so important, especially now that we're both getting older. I keep thinking about all the holidays and birthdays we missed sharing. Emily found herself nodding along, caught up in Sarah's enthusiasm. I always wondered about our family. Mom never talked much about Dad's side. Well, that's going to change now, Sarah declared, raising her wine glass, to reconnecting with family and making up for lost time. Sarah stayed for 5 days, and they were some of the best days Emily could remember. They went to museums, explored Powell's books, took a day trip to the Oregon coast. Sarah was fascinated by Emily's knowledge of literature and local history, and Emily basked in the attention and genuine interest. You know, Sarah said on her last evening, as they sat in Emily's apartment sharing a bottle of wine, I've been thinking. You should come spend Christmas with us in New York. Meet the rest of the family, see where Dad grew up. I know everyone would love to meet you. Emily felt tears prick her eyes. Really? You'd want me there? Of course. Your family. We should have been doing this all along. It was the first time anyone had called her and Emily loved how it sounded. Casual, affectionate, like she belonged. Meanwhile, David had become a regular presence in her life. He was an architect, divorced, with a dry sense of humor that made Emily laugh in ways she wasn't used to. Their coffee dates had evolved into dinner dates, and Emily found herself wondering if this might be something more than friendship. You're so different from what I expected, David said one evening, as they walked along the waterfront after dinner. In college, you were always so serious, so focused. But you're actually funny and thoughtful, and I don't know. There's something really compelling about you. Emily's heart raced. She had so little experience with romantic attention that she wasn't sure how to interpret his words. But the way he looked at her made her feel beautiful and wanted in a way she'd never experienced. I was probably just scared back then, she admitted. Too shy to let people see who I really was. Well, I'm glad I get to see now, David said. And when he walked her to her door, he kissed her goodnight. Soft and sweet and full of promise. Emily floated through the following days in a haze of happiness. Her phone was constantly buzzing with messages from her new social circle. Jessica included her in group chats about weekend plans and inside jokes. Sarah sent photos from New York and updates about family members Emily was looking forward to meeting. David texted her good morning messages and articles he thought she'd find interesting. For the first time in her life, Emily felt truly connected to other people. She marveled at how easy it all seemed now, how natural these friendships felt, how effortlessly she fit into these various groups. She began to wonder if she'd been wrong about herself all these years. Perhaps she wasn't naturally solitary, after all. Perhaps she'd just been waiting for the right people to come into her life. The thought that her father's death had opened the door to all these relationships felt bittersweet, but ultimately meaningful. Maybe this was his final gift to her, not just the financial inheritance, but the opportunity to build the family and social connections she'd always craved. 3 weeks after Sarah's visit, Emily made a decision that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. She called Mrs. Patterson and requested a leave of absence from the library. "I need to go to New York for an extended period," she explained. "There are family matters I need to attend to, and I want to spend time getting to know relatives I've been estranged from." Mrs. Patterson was understanding, if surprised. "Of course, Emily. You've been such a dedicated employee for so many years. Take all the time you need." Emily also made arrangements to have Mrs. Kim look after Mochi, promising to return before Christmas, or make other arrangements if she decided to stay longer. The decision to leave Portland, even temporarily, felt like stepping off a cliff. But for the first time in her adult life, Emily felt like she had people to catch her. Jessica threw her a going-away party, inviting everyone from their expanding social circle. Emily was overwhelmed by the warmth and affection showered on her. People toasted her courage in embracing this new chapter, and several mentioned how much they'd miss her. "Promise you'll stay in touch," Patricia said, hugging her tightly. "And if you decide to move to New York permanently, you have to visit Portland regularly. We need you in our lives." David's goodbye was more private, but no less intense. "I know this is something you need to do," he said, holding her close. "But I hope you know you have something real waiting for you here when you're ready." As Emily boarded the plane to New York, her heart was full of gratitude and anticipation. She was no longer the lonely librarian who had lived on the margins of other people's lives. She was a woman with friends who cared about her, a potential romantic partner who saw her value, and a family eager to welcome her home. She had no idea that she was walking directly into a carefully orchestrated performance, and that every word of affection, every gesture of care, every expression of love had been calculated and delivered by people who saw her not as a person worthy of genuine connection, but as a source of money waiting to be tapped. The plane lifted off into the gray Portland sky, carrying Emily toward what she believed was the loving embrace of family and friends, but what was actually a trap that had been set the moment news of her inheritance spread through networks of distant relatives and opportunistic acquaintances. As the city grew smaller below her, Emily smiled and thought about her father's letter. Perhaps he had been wrong to think that leaving her was protecting her. Perhaps some good could come from loss. Perhaps love, real love, was finally going to be part of her story. She was about to learn that the cruelest betrayals come not from enemies, but from those who make us believe they love us most. New York in December was magical in a way that made Emily understand why people wrote songs about it. The city twinkled with holiday lights, store windows displayed elaborate winter scenes, and the energy was infectious. Sarah had insisted that Emily stay at her spacious apartment on the Upper West Side rather than in a hotel, and Emily was touched by the gesture. "Family takes care of family," Sarah had said when Emily protested that she didn't want to impose. "Besides, we have so much catching up to do." Sarah's apartment was everything Emily's modest Portland home wasn't: sleek, modern, with floor-to-ceiling, windows offering stunning views of the Hudson River. Emily felt slightly overwhelmed by the luxury of it all, but Sarah was quick to put her at ease. I know it's a lot, Sarah laughed, noting Emily's wide-eyed expression as she took in the marble, countertops, and designer furniture. But you'll get used to it. Trust me. Once you settle into the New York lifestyle, Portland is going to feel awfully small. Over the first few days, Sarah took Emily on a whirlwind tour of Manhattan. They visited the penthouse apartment that Emily had inherited, a stunning space on East 78th Street with park views and artwork that made Emily's head spin when Sarah casually mentioned its value. They toured the Hamptons house, a sprawling estate with manicured gardens and a private beach that felt like something from a movie. Can you believe all this is yours? Sarah marveled as they stood on the deck of the Hamptons house looking out over the Atlantic. Uncle Richard really did well for himself. And for you. Emily still felt disconnected from the idea that any of this belonged to her. The homes were beautiful but cold, filled with expensive things that held no personal meaning. She found herself missing her small apartment with Mochi curled up in the sunny spot by the window. But what she didn't miss was the loneliness. Sarah had introduced her to an ever-expanding circle of relatives, cousins she'd never known existed, aunts and uncles who embraced her with warmth and enthusiasm. There was Cousin Marcus, a charming investment banker who regaled her with stories about the family business ventures. Aunt Caroline, her father's sister, who wept when she met Emily and spoke passionately about how much Emily resembled her father at her age. We tried to stay in touch after Richard left, Caroline explained over an emotional lunch. But your mother made it clear she didn't want anything to do with our side of the family. We respected that, but we never stopped caring about you. The family gatherings were frequent and elaborate. Emily found herself at dinner parties in upscale restaurants, weekend brunches in beautiful homes, holiday preparations that involved more people and more expense than she'd ever experienced. Everyone was interested in her opinions, her experiences, her plans for the future. You should move to New York permanently, suggested Marcus during one particularly lively family dinner. Portland's nice for visiting, but this is where opportunities are, where family is. Marcus is right, agreed Sarah. You could sell that little apartment. Use the money to really make a fresh start here. Get involved in the family business interests. Maybe do some philanthropy work. You have the resources now to make a real difference. Emily felt swept along by their enthusiasm and confidence. These people seemed to see potential in her that she'd never recognized in herself. They spoke about her future with such certainty and excitement that she began to believe their vision of her life. David called regularly from Portland, and their conversations left Emily feeling conflicted. His voice was warm and familiar, a connection to the quiet life she'd known. But increasingly it felt like he was calling from another world entirely. "How are you holding up with all the family time?" he asked during one evening call. "It's wonderful, actually," Emily replied, curled up in the guest room of Sarah's apartment. "I'm meeting relatives I never knew existed. Everyone's been so welcoming." "That's great, Em. I'm happy for you. But I have to ask, how are you feeling about everything? This must be overwhelming." Emily paused, considering his question. Was she overwhelmed? Sometimes, yes. But it was a good kind of overwhelming, wasn't it? The overwhelming feeling of finally belonging somewhere, of being wanted and valued. "I'm adjusting," she said finally. "It's different from what I'm used to, but maybe different is what I need." She could hear something in David's voice when he replied. Concern, maybe, or disappointment. "Just remember that you don't owe anyone anything, okay? Your inheritance is yours. Don't let anyone pressure you into anything you're not comfortable with." After hanging up, Emily felt a stab of irritation. Why was David being so negative? Her family wasn't pressuring her. They were supporting her, encouraging her to embrace the opportunities her father had left her. Wasn't that what people who cared about you were supposed to do? Jessica called frequently too, full of updates about the Portland social circle and questions about Emily's New York adventures. But increasingly, Emily noticed that Jessica's questions focused on specific details about the inheritance, the value of the properties, the size of the investment accounts, her plans for the money. "I'm just so excited for you," Jessica gushed during one call. "You deserve all of this after everything you've been through. Have you thought about making any investments? Mike's been doing really well with some real estate ventures. I could introduce you to his partners if you're interested." Emily found herself sharing more details than she'd intended, caught up in Jessica's enthusiasm and apparent interest in her financial well-being. It felt good to have someone who seemed genuinely excited about her good fortune, rather than concerned, or skeptical like David. As Christmas approached, the family gatherings became more frequent and more lavish. Emily was amazed by the generosity everyone showed: expensive gifts exchanged freely, elaborate meals at the finest restaurants, weekend trips to family properties she hadn't even known existed. "We have so much to celebrate this year," Aunt Caroline announced during a pre-Christmas dinner at her Park Avenue apartment. "Having Emily back in the family is the best gift we could have asked for." The toast was heartfelt, and Emily felt tears in her eyes as the assembled relatives raised their glasses to her. She had never experienced this kind of unconditional acceptance and love. It was intoxicating. But it was Cousin Marcus who brought up what he called the practical matters that would need to be addressed soon. "Emily, I hope you don't mind me mentioning this, but there are some tax implications we should discuss regarding your inheritance. The estate planning could be optimized significantly with some strategic moves." Emily felt out of her depth. "I'm not sure I understand." "Well, for example, if you were to make some family gifts before the end of the year, you could reduce your tax burden substantially, and there are investment opportunities that could help preserve and grow the wealth rather than letting it sit in standard accounts." Sarah nodded enthusiastically. "Marcus is brilliant with this stuff. He's helped several family members optimize their finances. I'd be happy to introduce you to my firm," Marcus continued. "We could set up a comprehensive wealth management plan. And of course, there are some family investment opportunities that could benefit everyone." Emily felt a familiar flutter of anxiety. "What kind of opportunities?" "Nothing too complicated," Marcus assured her with a warm smile. "Some real estate, ventures, a few business partnerships, the kind of investments that benefit from family involvement and shared resources." The conversation moved on to other topics, but Emily found herself thinking about Marcus's suggestions. She knew so little about managing money, especially this amount of money. Having family members guide her made sense, didn't it? They had her best interests at heart, and they certainly knew more about these things than she did. Over the next few days, the suggestions became more specific and more frequent. Sarah mentioned a business opportunity that could really use Emily's investment. Aunt Caroline talked about a family foundation that needed funding to continue its important work. Marcus presented detailed proposals for investment strategies that would keep the wealth in the family while generating excellent returns. Emily found herself nodding along, signing documents that Marcus assured her were standard wealth management agreements, making transfers that everyone agreed were smart financial moves that Uncle Richard would have approved of. It was during the formal Christmas dinner at Aunt Caroline's apartment that Emily first felt a flicker of unease. The evening was beautiful. 30 family members gathered around an enormous table laden with expensive china and crystal, the room filled with laughter and conversation, and the warm glow of candlelight. But as Emily listened to the conversations around her, she began to notice patterns that made her stomach clench with something she couldn't quite name. Marcus was discussing a real estate deal with another cousin, mentioning Emily's recent investment as crucial to its success. Sarah was talking to someone about vacation plans that would be funded by M's generous contribution to the family travel fund. Aunt Caroline was describing renovations to the family's Cape Cod property that were possible, thanks to our dear Emily's support. Emily realized with growing horror that every conversation seemed to revolve, directly or indirectly, around her money, her contributions, her investments, her generosity. She excused herself to use the bathroom and found herself staring at her reflection in Caroline's ornate powder room mirror. The face looking back at her was thinner than it had been a month ago, with dark circles under her eyes despite the excitement and activity of her New York social life. When had she started looking so tired? When had the joy of these family gatherings started to feel like performance anxiety? Emily returned to the dinner table and tried to focus on the conversation, but now she couldn't unhear the undercurrents. Every compliment seemed to come with a request. Every expression of love was followed by a financial opportunity that needed her attention. "Emily, darling," Aunt Caroline was saying, "I was just telling everyone about your incredible generosity with the foundation. $50,000. Richard would be so proud to see his daughter carrying on the family tradition of philanthropy." Emily's fork paused halfway to her mouth. $50,000. She remembered signing some papers that Marcus had described as tax-advantageous charitable contributions, but she hadn't realized the amount was so substantial. "And the investment in Marcus's development project," Sarah added with a bright smile. $200,000. That's going to benefit the whole family for years to come. 200,000? Emily felt the room spin slightly. She'd signed those papers because Marcus had explained it as diversifying her portfolio with family-secured investments, but hearing the amount spoken aloud made her realize how much money had been flowing out of her accounts in just a few weeks. "Plus the family vacation fund," chimed in another cousin whose name Emily couldn't remember. "That 100,000 is going to give us the most amazing Christmas in Aspen next year." Emily set down her fork, her appetite completely gone. 100,000 for a family vacation? When had she agreed to that? "I'm feeling a little tired," she said quietly. "Would it be okay if I stepped out for some air?" The chorus of concern was immediate and overwhelming. "Of course, sweetheart. Are you feeling all right? Should someone go with you? You've been doing so much running around. You need to take care of yourself." Emily made her way to Caroline's balcony, where the December air was sharp and cleared her head instantly. Below her, Central Park stretched out in winter silence, the trees bare and honest against the snow. Her phone buzzed with a text from David. "Merry Christmas Eve, Em. Hope you're having a wonderful time with your family. Missing you here in Portland. Mrs. Kim says Mochi is doing great and she's enjoying the company. Can't wait to hear all about your adventures when you're ready to share." The simple, caring message with no underlying agenda hit Emily like a physical blow. When was the last time someone had asked about her well-being without following it up with a request for money? When was the last time someone had mentioned missing her, rather than missing her contributions to their projects? Emily pulled out her phone and opened her banking app, something she'd been avoiding for weeks because the numbers were so overwhelming. What she saw made her legs go weak. In the 6 weeks since she'd arrived in New York, nearly $800,000 had left her accounts. $800,000 in investments, charitable contributions, family support, and opportunity shares that she could barely remember agreeing to. Her hands shook as she scrolled through the transactions. $50,000 to the WA Family Foundation, $200,000 to Marcus's development company, $100,000 to something called Chen Family Enterprises that she'd never heard of, $75,000 to Sarah's friend's startup opportunity. Smaller amounts, $10,000 here, $20,000 there, for everything from family, dinner bills to someone's car, repair to a cousin's medical expenses. The balcony door opened behind her, and Sarah stepped out, wrapping a cashmere shawl around her shoulders. "There you are. Everyone's worried about you. Are you feeling okay?" Emily turned to face her cousin, this woman who had become so central to her life in such a short time. "Sarah, can I ask you something?" "Of course, anything. How did you get my phone number? That first day when you texted me in New York. How did you know I was there? How did you even know about my father's death?" Sarah's smile flickered for just a moment, so briefly that Emily almost missed it. "Oh, you know how family networks are. News travels fast. I think Aunt Caroline heard from someone who knew someone at the law firm." But you had my personal cell phone number. Did I? I thought I got it from… Well, I'm not sure exactly. Does it matter? The important thing is that we found each other again. Emily stared at her cousin's face in the light from the apartment windows. Sarah looked the same as she had 6 weeks ago. Warm, caring, genuinely happy to see her. But something had shifted in Emily's perception, and now she could see the calculation behind the warmth, the assessment in what she'd thought were loving glances. Sarah, how much money have I given to the family since I've been here? Sarah laughed, but it sounded forced. Given? Emily, you haven't given anyone anything. You've made investments, supported causes you believe in, participated in family opportunities. That's completely different. How much? Sarah's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. I don't keep track of your financial decisions, Emily. That's between you and Marcus and your wealth management team. Emily felt something cold settle in her chest. My wealth management team that you introduced me to, my investment opportunities that you recommended, my charitable contributions that you suggested. Emily, I think you're overtired. This has been a big adjustment for you, and maybe you're feeling overwhelmed. Why don't we go back inside? Everyone's worried about you. But Emily didn't move. She was remembering other conversations now, seeing them in a different light. The casual mentions of her generosity, the frequent discussions of her responsibility to the family, the constant suggestions about how she should honor Richard's legacy through various financial commitments. I want to see the paperwork, Emily said quietly. All of it. Everything I've signed since I've been here. Sarah's mask slipped further. Emily, you're being paranoid. We're your family. We love you. Everything we've suggested has been for your benefit. Then you won't mind showing me the paperwork. Fine, Sarah snapped, her warm demeanor finally cracking completely. But I think you're being incredibly ungrateful. We've welcomed you into our lives, introduced you to opportunities you never could have imagined in Portland, treated you like the family you are. And now you're acting like we're criminals. Emily followed Sarah back into the apartment, where the dinner party was still in full swing. But now the laughter sounded hollow to her ears, and the warm smiles directed her way looked calculating and false. Marcus approached them as they came back inside. Everything okay, ladies? Emily, you look a little pale. I want to see all the investment documents, Emily said without preamble. And I want an accounting of exactly where my money has gone. The change in Marcus was immediate and dramatic. His practiced smile disappeared, replaced by cold professionalism. Of course. Though I have to say, Emily, it's unusual for clients to second-guess sound financial advice after they've already committed to strategies. I'm not second-guessing anything. I'm asking for transparency about my own money. Your money that you've entrusted to professionals who know how to manage it properly, Marcus replied, his voice taking on a condescending edge. Emily, you were a small-town librarian 6 weeks ago. Do you really think you're qualified to evaluate complex investment strategies? The room had gone quiet. Emily realized that everyone was watching the exchange, and the expressions on their faces ranged from uncomfortable to openly hostile. I think, Emily said carefully, that I'm qualified to understand what happens to my own inheritance. Aunt Caroline stepped forward, her earlier warmth replaced by something much colder. Emily, dear, I think you're having some kind of episode. This isn't like you at all. You don't know what I'm like, Emily replied, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. None of you do. You've known me for 6 weeks. We're your family, Caroline insisted. We've opened our homes to you, included you in everything, treated you with nothing but love and respect. Have you? Emily looked around the room at the faces that had seemed so welcoming just hours earlier. Or have you treated me like a walking ATM that you could access by performing affection? The silence that followed was deafening. Emily could see the truth in their faces. The calculations, the frustration at being questioned, the barely concealed irritation at her ingratitude. It was Sarah who finally spoke, and her voice was ice cold. "You know, Emily, I was wrong about you. I thought you'd grown up, become someone who understood how the world works. But you're still that same paranoid, antisocial little girl who couldn't make friends in high school." The words hit Emily like physical blows, but they also clarified something important. This was who these people really were. This coldness, this calculation, this willingness to use her deepest insecurities as weapons. This was the truth beneath the performance of love. "I want to leave," Emily said quietly. "Where exactly do you think you're going to go?" Marcus asked, with a cruel smile. "Back to Portland? To your little apartment and your cat and your dead-end job? You don't belong there anymore, Emily. You belong here, with us, whether you like it or not." Emily felt the walls closing in around her. Every face in the room was either hostile or carefully neutral, and she realized that she was completely alone in a room full of people who had convinced her they loved her. "I'm going back to Sarah's to get my things," she said. "Actually," Sarah replied with a cold smile, "I think you should find somewhere else to stay tonight. I don't feel comfortable having someone so paranoid and ungrateful in my home." Emily stared at her cousin, the woman who had embraced her warmly just 6 weeks ago, who had called her family, who had promised that she would never be alone again. "Fine," Emily said quietly. "I'll get a hotel." As she moved toward the door, "Aunt," Caroline called after her. "Emily, think very carefully about what you're doing. We're the only family you have. If you walk away from us, you'll be completely alone. Is that really what you want?" Emily turned back to look at the room full of people who had spent weeks convincing her that they loved her. "I'd rather be alone and honest than surrounded by people who see me as a source of income." The last thing she heard as she left was Sarah's voice, cold and cutting. "Don't come crying to us when you realize what a mistake you've made. We won't be here for you next time." Emily walked out into the December night, her breath visible in the cold air, and realized that for the first time in weeks she could breathe clearly. The loneliness that had driven her into their arms was still there, sharper than ever. But now it was honest loneliness rather than the desperate need that had made her vulnerable to their manipulation. She had nowhere to go, and no one to call. But she was finally free from the suffocating performance of fake love that had nearly cost her everything. As she walked through the empty streets looking for a hotel, Emily pulled out her phone and saw 17 missed calls from Jessica in Portland. She almost didn't answer when the phone rang again, but something made her pick up. "Emily, thank God!" Jessica's voice was breathless with excitement. "I've been trying to reach you for hours. Listen, I have the most amazing opportunity for you. Mike's partners have this incredible investment deal, but they need someone to come in with substantial capital by tomorrow morning. It's a sure thing, but the window is closing fast. How quickly can you wire $200,000? Emily stopped walking and stood still in the middle of the sidewalk, snowflakes beginning to fall around her. The last piece of the puzzle clicked into place, and she finally understood the full scope of what had been done to her. "Jessica," she said quietly, "how long have you known about my inheritance?" There was a pause, and when Jessica spoke again, her voice was different, less warm, more calculating. "What do you mean?" "I mean, when did you first hear that I had inherited money? Because I'm starting to think it was before you called me that first day." Another pause, longer this time. "Emily, I don't know what you're implying, but I'm implying that you've been in contact with my family in New York. I'm implying that everyone who has suddenly wanted to be my friend, everyone who has reached out to me with love and concern and investment opportunities, has known exactly how much money I inherited, and has been working together to separate me from as much of it as possible. Emily could hear Jessica's breathing on the other end of the line, and the silence stretched between them like a confession. "You're being paranoid, Emily," Jessica finally said, but her voice lacked conviction. "We're your friends. We care about you." "No," Emily replied, surprising herself with how calm she sounded. "You care about my money, and I'm done giving it to people who pretend to love me." She hung up the phone and immediately blocked Jessica's number, then blocked Sarah's, then Marcus's, then every single person who had entered her life in the past, 6 weeks claiming to care about her. Standing alone on a snowy New York street at midnight on Christmas Eve, Emily finally understood her father's last gift to her. It wasn't the money. It was the lesson that money reveals the truth about people, and that being alone with integrity was infinitely better than being surrounded by those who would use your deepest needs against you. She had lost nearly $800,000, but she had gained something more valuable: the knowledge of who she really was when stripped of illusions and false comfort. Emily pulled her coat tighter around her and began walking toward the lights of a hotel in the distance, ready to face whatever came next with clear eyes and an honest heart. The hotel room was small and sterile, nothing like the luxury Emily had grown accustomed to during her weeks in Sarah's apartment. But as she sat on the edge of the bed at 2 a.m. on Christmas Day, she felt more at peace than she had in weeks. The silence was honest, free from the constant buzz of phones and social obligations and people who wanted something from her. Emily spent Christmas Day alone, walking through the empty streets of Manhattan, visiting museums that were closed, sitting in Central Park watching dog walkers and the occasional jogger. She bought herself a sandwich from a deli run by a Korean family who wished her Merry Christmas with genuine warmth, and she realized it was the first sincere human interaction she'd had in weeks. That evening, she called David. His voice was warm and familiar, and she felt tears spring to her eyes at the simple pleasure of talking to someone who asked how she was feeling without following it up with a request for money. "Em, how was your Christmas with the family?" Emily took a deep breath. "David, I need to tell you something. You were right to be concerned. About everything." She told him the whole story. The gradual escalation of requests, the investment opportunities, that she now realized were probably scams, the way every expression of love had come with a price tag attached. David listened without interruption, and when she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "I'm so sorry, Emily. I should have said something stronger, should have warned you more directly." "No," Emily said firmly. "I needed to learn this lesson, myself, and I'm glad I learned it now, rather than later, before I gave away everything." "What are you going to do?" Emily looked out the hotel window at the city lights. "I'm going to fight back. I'm going to get my money back, and I'm going to make sure they can't do this to anyone else." The next morning, Emily made an appointment with a different law firm, one that specialized in financial fraud and elder abuse. The lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Rebecca Martinez, listened to Emily's story with growing interest. "Ms. Chen, what you're describing is a sophisticated financial exploitation scheme. The fact that they targeted you immediately after your father's death, that they had inside information about your inheritance, that they worked in coordination. This isn't just opportunism. This is organized fraud." Emily felt a mixture of vindication and anger. "Can I get my money back?" "Some of it, certainly. The investments that went to shell companies, the charitable contributions to organizations that don't exist. Those are clear fraud. The family gifts will be harder to recover, but we can pursue them. The key is going to be proving coordination and intent to defraud." Rebecca assigned an investigator to Emily's case, and within a week, they had uncovered a web of connections that made Emily's stomach turn. Sarah, Marcus, Jessica, and several others had been in contact with each other for months, sharing information about Emily's inheritance and coordinating their approaches. "Look at this," Rebecca said, showing Emily printed emails that the investigator had obtained. Sarah contacted Jessica 3 days after your father's death, before you'd even flown to New York. She provided Jessica with your contact information and suggested the reconnection approach. Emily read the emails with growing horror and anger. Her entire social circle in Portland, her romantic relationship with David, her family connections in New York, it had all been orchestrated. Every person who had claimed to love her had been working from a script designed to separate her from her inheritance. "What about David?" Emily asked, afraid to hear the answer. Rebecca flipped through more documents. Actually, Mr. Harrison appears to be clean. There's no evidence he was part of the scheme, and in fact, there are several emails where the others discuss him as a potential problem, someone who might interfere with their access to you. Emily felt a flood of relief and gratitude. At least one person in her life had been genuine. The legal battle took months, but Rebecca and her team were thorough and relentless. They recovered $450,000 from fake investment schemes and fraudulent charities. They couldn't recover the money that had gone to actual family members for legitimate-seeming purposes, but they did manage to freeze several accounts and prevent further theft. More importantly to Emily, they built a case that resulted in criminal charges against Sarah, Marcus, and 3 others for conspiracy to commit fraud. Jessica and several Portland accomplices faced charges for wire fraud and identity theft. During the investigation, Emily learned just how calculating and cruel the scheme had been. The conspirators had researched her background extensively, identifying her loneliness and desperate need for connection as her primary vulnerability. They had crafted personas designed specifically to appeal to her. Sarah as the loving family member, Marcus as the sophisticated financial advisor, Jessica as the warm friend from her past. They knew exactly what buttons to push, Rebecca explained. They studied you like a target, identified your emotional needs, and exploited them systematically. Emily found this knowledge both devastating and empowering. Devastating because it confirmed that everything she had felt during those weeks, the love, the acceptance, the sense of belonging, had been an illusion designed to manipulate her. Empowering because it meant that her instincts about people and relationships weren't fundamentally flawed. She had simply been the victim of sophisticated predators. While the legal case progressed, Emily made some important decisions about her life. She returned to Portland and to her job at the library, but she also began seeing a therapist to help process the betrayal and manipulation she had experienced. What happened to you wasn't about your worth as a person, Dr. Sarah Kim explained during one of their sessions. It was about criminals who saw vulnerability and exploited it. The fact that you were open to love and connection isn't a weakness. It's what makes you human. Emily also began the process of figuring out what she wanted to do with the money she had left. Still a substantial sum, even after the theft and legal fees. She realized that her father's gift came with a responsibility to use it wisely, both for herself and for others. She kept her small apartment, but bought the building, ensuring that Mrs. Kim and other longtime tenants would never face displacement. She established a scholarship fund for first-generation college students who wanted to pursue library science or education. She donated to literacy programs and supported local organizations that helped victims of financial fraud. "I want to make sure that what happened to me doesn't happen to other people," she told Rebecca during one of their meetings. "Especially people who are grieving or vulnerable." Emily also began speaking to groups about financial fraud, sharing her story as a warning to others. It was terrifying at first, standing in front of strangers and admitting how thoroughly she had been fooled. But she found that her vulnerability helped others recognize similar patterns in their own lives. During one speaking engagement at a senior center, an elderly man approached her afterward. "My daughter died last year," he said quietly. "Since then, I've had 3 relatives I never heard of contact me about investments. After hearing your story, I think I know what's really going on." These conversations reminded Emily that her experience, as painful as it had been, could serve a purpose. She could use her father's money, not just to recover from being victimized, but to protect others from the same fate. David had been patient and supportive throughout her legal battle and recovery process. He never pressured her to define their relationship or to make commitments she wasn't ready for. Instead, he simply remained present, calling regularly, visiting when she was ready for company, offering practical support when she needed it. "I keep thinking I should be more suspicious of everyone now," Emily told him one evening as they walked along the waterfront. "But I don't want to become paranoid and closed off. That's not who I want to be." "You don't have to choose between being trusting and being smart," David replied. "You can be both. What happened to you happened because people deliberately deceived you in sophisticated ways. That doesn't mean you can't still be open to genuine connections." 6 months after the confrontation at Aunt Caroline's apartment, Emily received a call from Rebecca. "We got them," Rebecca said, unable to keep the satisfaction out of her voice. Sarah and Marcus both pled guilty to avoid trial. They're looking at 3 to 5 years in federal prison, plus restitution. Jessica and her Portland accomplices took plea deals as well. Emily felt a complex mix of emotions: relief, vindication, and surprisingly, sadness. Not sadness for the people who had betrayed her, but sadness for the version of herself who had been so hungry for love that she had ignored every warning sign. "There's something else," Rebecca continued. "We've been contacted by victims in 3 other similar cases. Apparently, this group has been running variations of this scheme for years, targeting vulnerable people who have recently inherited money. Your case is going to help prosecute those cases too." Emily realized that her father's final gift to her had been even more valuable than she'd initially understood. Not only had he left her the financial resources to build a good life, but her experience with those resources had taught her lessons about love, trust, and self-worth that no amount of money could buy. A year after her father's death, Emily stood in his penthouse apartment, her penthouse apartment now, looking out over Central Park. She had finally decided to spend time in New York, but on her own terms. She was considering using the space for a foundation office, a place where people who had been victimized by financial fraud could get support and resources. Her phone buzzed with a text from David. "How's the apartment? Still think you prefer Portland?" Emily smiled as she typed back. "Portland will always be home, but I think I can find good ways to use this space too." She had learned to distinguish between being alone and being lonely. She had been alone in her small apartment for years, but she had been lonely in rooms full of people who claimed to love her. Now she understood that solitude could be a choice rather than a burden, and that genuine connection was worth waiting. For Emily had also learned that her father's absence from her life, while painful, had given her something valuable: the ability to rely on herself, to trust her own judgment, and to find strength in independence. The people who had tried to exploit her had counted on her desperation for family and connection, but they had underestimated her capacity for resilience and growth. As she prepared to leave the penthouse and return to Portland, Emily found herself thinking about her father's letter. He had written that he hoped she could forgive him, and she realized that she finally could. Not because what he had done was right, but because she understood now that people make decisions based on their own fears and limitations, and that his abandonment said more about his struggles than about her worth. The inheritance had cost her nearly $800,000 and months of legal battles, but it had also given her something priceless: the knowledge that she was strong enough to stand alone when necessary, smart enough to learn from devastating mistakes, and valuable enough to deserve genuine love when it finally came her way. Emily locked the apartment door behind her and headed to the airport, ready to return to her real life. Smaller, perhaps, than the fantasy that had been offered to her, but authentic in ways that no amount of money could purchase. On the plane back to Portland, she opened her laptop and began writing. She had been asked to contribute to a book about financial fraud, and she wanted to make sure her chapter captured not just the mechanics of what had been done to her, but the emotional journey of recovery and self-discovery that had followed. "The cruelest thing about being targeted for financial exploitation," she wrote, "isn't the money that's stolen. It's the way that genuine human needs, for love, for family, for connection, are weaponized against you. Recovery isn't just about getting your money back. It's about learning to trust yourself again and learning the difference between being loved and being managed." As the plane lifted off from New York, Emily looked down at the city where she had learned some of life's hardest lessons. She felt no nostalgia for the fantasy life she had briefly believed was hers, but she felt profound gratitude for the real life she was returning to. Complicated, sometimes lonely, but entirely her own. Her phone buzzed with a message from Mrs. Kim. "Welcome. Home dinner tomorrow? Mochi has been asking about you." Emily smiled and typed back, "I'll be there. And Mrs. Kim? Thank you for taking care of him. It means more than you know." She realized that she had always had family. It just hadn't looked the way she thought it should. Mrs. Kim, who checked on her and fed her cat without being asked. David, who cared about her well-being without expecting anything in return. Her co-workers at the library, who had covered her shifts and welcomed her back without question. Real love, Emily had learned, didn't announce itself with grand gestures or expensive gifts. It showed up quietly, consistently, without expectation of reward. It didn't need to be performed or declared. It simply was. As the plane carried her home to Portland, Emily Chen finally understood her father's true gift. Not the money that had nearly destroyed her, but the strength she had discovered. Within herself, when everything else was stripped away, she was returning to her small apartment and her quiet life. But she was not returning as the lonely, desperate woman who had left. She was returning as someone who knew her own worth, someone who could distinguish between authentic love and elaborate performance, someone who had learned that the most important relationship she would ever have was the one with herself. The city lights of Portland appeared below, warm and familiar, and Emily felt truly wealthy for the first time in her life.